I am an enemy of the AI doomer safetyist tyranny. I reject it wholesale. I believe the hysteria around artificial intelligence is ill thought out, it is misbegotten, it is wrong, it is leading to dangerous policy proposals like that in New York, which just came out that they're going to ban data center construction for a year in the state. I think this hysteria is bad for the economy. It's bad for human flourishing. It's anti-life. It's vicious. It lends itself to fundamentally left-wing ideas about property and government. I think it is reminiscent of the horror of the COVID lockdowns. You have this group of experts and technologists and legislators and policymakers who want to come together to create restrictive regulatory entities designed to restrain this technology, and in the course of doing so, to repress human freedom. I think technology is a good thing. I think it is pro-life. It is human. Freedom is good. That is should be the standard, that we should be able to use our minds to solve problems. I think it is awesome that we live in an era where these kinds of technologies are available for us. I think there are, of course, real dangers, but they stem fundamentally from human problems. When we talk about technology, we're not really talking about technology. We're talking about human beings. The question of freedom, the question of the proper relation to government, those are human questions. They're political questions. We should address them in that way. Welcome back to Lippincott Talk. My name is Josiah Lippincott. Today's episode is about AI and technology. I'm going to do something new here today. I'm going to discuss AI and criticisms of artificial intelligence and the political and economic ramifications of this revolution in intelligence. But I'm going to do so through a singular article that came out this week by Gregory Conti at Compact Magazine. And the piece is called "The AI Apocalypse is Already Here." And I think Conti is just completely wrong. I think his whole frame, his anti-AI stance, his call for this complete suppression of the technology is wrong. I think it is inhuman for the same reasons I just listed. But what I want to do here today is just go through the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do intend to read passages from his writing and address them as they come up. And my goal is to hopefully provide a succinct explanation of my own position, to give a clear articulation of the problems I have with the AI critics. There's a lot of criticisms of technology today. And I think there's this very strange moment we're entering into as you see the rise of the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party. You see the push for increasing controls over land and construction, especially bound up in the data center fight, the new power generation that needs to come online to fund these new technologies. But you also see, at the same time, you see like the European heat wave, and like Europeans don't even have air conditioning, right? And you can see the ramification of degrowth policies there. And it seems like every day we're also seeing stories of what life looks like when you don't have the ability to develop new technologies to improve things, where you see the restraining of human possibilities. And I find myself increasingly radicalizing about private property rights and freedom. The more I think about the COVID lockdowns and Zohran Mamdani and just the sort of craziness I've seen at a local level about economic growth and development, I'm coming to the position that we need a bias towards construction, towards life, towards using the mind to make things better. And that's a core part of what it means to be an American. That innovative spirit depends upon private property and human freedom. It depends upon law and order. These things are bound together. And as we've lost a sense of who we are as a people, of what our freedom is for and what our identity is, at that moment we see ourselves losing that dynamism, losing that ability to create and grow. There's ossification spreading everywhere. There's a focus on what is old and sick and dying as opposed to what is young and life-affirming and strong. And I think that reveals, at its essence, the core distinction between the right and the left. I see in the left a longing to elevate the least among us, and in the right, the longing for virtue and excellence. And virtue and excellence are found in the human individual. And it is the longing for virtue and excellence that builds a kind of community that is devoted to something higher, that emerges in America at the time of the founding, that makes us distinct and gives us our way of life. And I'm working this out increasingly because I think there's a lack of clarity here. You see people talking about the founding stock or the nation, in the American context. But this often misses the point that Americans, traditionally very similar to their European cousins and forebears. But what made us distinct? There is something in the American way of life, in our principles, in the way we conceive of the individual and his possibilities that makes us distinct from our European brethren, that made America a land of opportunity. And I think it is all too often the case that that vision has been abused by the political left, by the defenders, or those who've tolerated the New Deal and the massive state apparatus that grew up in the 20th century. They're unwilling to really defend the core of what the American way of life is. Anyway, that's just a framing for my own thinking as I address these questions, and hopefully some of this will come out as I read from passages from Conti's article and respond. And into his due, I think you should go read the whole thing. You want to get the AI Doomer experience, you can. Again, the title is The AI Apocalypse is already here. It's on Compact Mag. It's free to read. So anyway, let's dive in. The first quote from the article is this, quote, and this is Conti, quote, "Democracy simply cannot survive if the economic contributions of most people are rendered irrelevant, an eventuality which AI leaders foresee and have often seemed to revel in," unquote. I start there because when people talk about AI, they are always talking about economics, and they almost always get it wrong. And I think one of the most common refrains is the idea that human labor will be made completely obsolete by the increase in possibilities created by AI. If AI can do a job or a robot can do a job, then human beings will have no more purpose or reason to work. That our economic contributions will be rendered irrelevant. AI will eat the economy, it will eat all the jobs. And I've said this before, but I'll affirm it again. Human labor exists because we live in a world of problems. And the biggest problem for us as human beings is that we long for the good and to have it forever. But we are mortal beings living in a world of scarce resources. So the core question is this: is AI going to solve death and bring about permanent utopia and happiness for each individual human being? I don't think so, right? So what that means is we're going to continue to have problems that require work in order to be solved. So the idea that, robots are going to make things that are super cheap and we're going to have a flood of consumer goods, and then how are people going to have jobs? That doesn't even make sense. If we were able to solve a bunch of problems in our lives, imagine if your housing costs were lowered by 90% or your food budget went down by 90% and robots and AI managed to solve a bunch of, do all your taxes for you and solve your paperwork and do investments. You would still have real questions and problems in your life that needed to be solved, right? You'd still have a longing for love and companionship. You'd still have friendships you want to maintain. You'd still need to be a good father or mother or husband or wife or sister. All of those things would still be left to you. You'd still long to create art. You'd still long to have good things in your life. You'd want to travel. You'd want to have experiences. You'd grapple with death. You'd have questions about God. You have questions about the afterlife, questions that no computer system is going to be able to answer for you. So again, just right here, in this statement from Conti, I think it misunderstands the human condition. As long as there remains problems, there will be a need for human labor and work. And in a way, that's the curse that we live under, that we have to keep working in order to eliminate the condition of poverty that we've been born into. Human beings start off with the naked body and the mind. And, if you're born into a world that already has capital accumulation, as those of us in the West today certainly have, we come with tools that we're born into. We have this inheritance that we get to be a part of, but it's by no means complete, and there's plenty of work left to be done. Each individual has to confront the real questions of human life for themselves. You can't outsource that to anyone else, much less to a computer. And again, so at the core point, the economics that Conti is describing here is just wrong. Of course, there will be a need for human labor. Another point is, even as machines get better at certain tasks, if you have machines can do X amount of labor, let's say it's 1,000 times what human beings can do. If machines can do this much amount of labor and humans do this much over here, bringing those two things together means you'll have more labor available. There'll be marginal utility in human beings working. So that point is another reason why AI machines are not going to simply eliminate human labor, because there will still be value to human beings, but that value will be added into machines, right? We've had all this experience in the creation of new transportation technologies, trucks, trains, planes, ships. They can travel. So much more can travel now than did 50 or 100 years ago, but yet we still work. Why? Because even though there's been a massive increase in the human capacity to transfer and transport goods, there's still more work to be done. We still have problems left to be solved. The ability to solve a bunch of problems just means there are others that we still need to address. And by the way, while we're here at the beginning, there's tons of problems that need to be solved today. I mean, imagine thinking that we're at a point where we don't need human labor any longer. Insane. And we're not even close to having AI solve problems. Cancer and dementia still exist, right? Okay. Until those go away, there will be plenty of demand for human labor, plenty of demand. Anyway, so I'm kind of launching here right in the beginning of Conti's argument, and this will be a theme, I think, in other passages. The guy doesn't understand economics. He doesn't understand human action. He doesn't understand the purpose of labor or the purpose of economizing activity. So then his claims about technology are all fundamentally wrong. So he talks about technology without understanding human beings who give rise to technology. That's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. It's the glaring essay. It's the glaring weakness in this essay and in almost all criticisms of AI. Anyway, this is another insight into this AI doomer mindset. Here's another quote. Quote, in a world of robot soldiers of the sort some AI champions envision, in which the willingness of the average citizen to fight and die for his country is no longer necessary to the well-being of the state and national elites, there will be much less reason for governments to accord citizens rights, unquote. I want to point out how crazy that statement is. It's like, whoa, if we can defend our country with robots without having human casualties, that's, in his view, bad for the citizenry. Like, do you understand how crazy that statement is? If citizens are only valuable if they're able to be cannon fodder and taxpayer pay pigs. Like, that is such a bizarre and warped view of citizenship. I don't know how you get this in your mind, that dying and getting killed in a war is like a good thing. The purpose of national defense is protection. If we're able to protect ourselves without taking massive casualties, that is an unmitigated good thing, right? If the expense of defending the country drops dramatically and we can lower taxes on ordinary people, we've succeeded, right? What is the problem here? Not enough people are paying taxes and dying? No, that's an expense. You want to get that down. That's a good thing. I live in a world where the purpose of government's very clear. Do your job at protection. I don't get why we need to have people dying in order to have citizenship be meaningful. Citizenship is meaningful because we devote ourselves to our common good, which is defense. And we get along with each other and we follow the law and treat each other with respect. Succeeding in that task is a good thing. That should be obvious. It is not obvious to Conti. Here's another quote from Conti. And I'm skipping through some passages, but I'm just reading here what I thought was most interesting. Quote, moreover, while tech right leaders such as Elon Musk used to complain about censorship and cancel culture, it's clear already that AI is a far more powerful technology for the suppression of unwanted expression than social media algorithms. Its ability to identify and track speakers across platforms will make anonymity impossible, and the inevitable encoding of bias and partiality into its models pose great threats to discursive freedom. If free speech is an integral part of democracy, then we have good reason to fear AI, unquote. This is not an argument about AI. It is an argument about censorship and human choices on how to employ AI to serve their political goals. If we don't want AI being used for state-mandated censorship, then we should get rid of the instruments of state-mandated censorship. That's where the problem is. It's not in the technology they're using. Aristotle in his Politics describes a surveillance state tyranny in the pre-modern Greek world, where you have people paying attention to one another and spying on each other, right? Technology, in some ways, a pre-technical society is far more repressive and has far more surveillance than the one we have now, because you don't have the tools to escape from that society. If you got born into, let's say, an Aztec community, your ability to leave is confined by the inavailability of transport, the sheer vulnerability of human beings in that natural environment. Also, your own lack of consciousness, education, and learning. You're enmeshed really far more, to a far greater degree, in the pre-modern world under the surveillance of the elders, of your fellow citizens, so-called, and of your, the priestly class and the ruling class. In our world, we have transportation technology, we have widespread information, we have the ability to leverage these resources at an individual level to protect ourselves. Weaponization of technology follows a dialectical process. You get a new development and you get a response designed to constrain that new change. And then a new situation, a synthesis emerges. And that's why innovations in technology don't really change the fundamental nature of warfare. There's both innovation and response in a constant cycle. So those who are fearing that there'll be a one-and-done AI tyranny put in place are missing the fact that human life is dynamic, and the same technology that governments can use to repress civilians is available to civilians in order to defend themselves from their government. And there is plenty of reason to believe that an ossified state, with all of its bureaucratic largesse and hiring the least among us into important roles, will curtail its ability to enact its will over such a large population as the United States governs today, much less to talk about the world. In many ways, the modern state is in collapse. It's no longer able to deliver on core principles of statehood. The government can't keep homeless people out of the parks, or it refuses to do so. Doesn't have the ability. The left was not able to keep Donald Trump out of office. And again, these technologies, every technology that comes into being is available for anyone to use if you put it for sale and it's allowed to innovate in the open market, so to speak. So anyway, I don't buy this argument that AI is inherently repressive. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's not how technology works. Yes, technical developments can make it so that you have more repression. They also make it easier to free yourself from repression. It's a dialectical process. It's a constant cycle of innovation, call and response, conflict that generates new circumstances constantly. You can't think of it in a static mode. You have to think of life as a process of change. And if you don't do that, you're going to miss reality. Moving on to the next quote from Conti. Quote, "In our present context, a conservative antagonism to AI would be based entirely on it being a special technology. It would not be about the inherent evil of billionaires or about capitalism being a depraved system or a comprehensive distrust of new technologies that improve our lives. It would be grounded entirely in the disjunction between generative AI and other innovations and on the unlikelihood, with a sui generis technology advancing so quickly and unpredictably, that suitable breaks and recalibrations could be applied at the critical juncture," unquote. The question I have here is, how is AI special? What makes it special? Oh, well, it's intelligence. It's different. It's like, no, calculator has intelligence. Computer search functions have intelligence. The ability for other human beings have intelligence. That's another point here as well. So if AI mimics human beings, what is the problem here? That this intelligence is contained within a machine as opposed to another person? The argument he's making here could just as easily be applied to geniuses who are too special or they're too great compared to the ordinary man. And therefore, we need to have brakes on innovation and on the development of the individual's ability to think about the world. And none of that works. And again, you have to ask this question: who decides? Quis iudicabit? Who will decide? Who will decide what technologies should be allowed or not allowed? Is it democracy that will choose? The vote of the majority to extract resources from a few, to determine how a few individuals should be able to use their minds, use their property, use their ability to think about the world? Is that the world you want to live in? He's got all these fears about, oh, well, I'm not a socialist. I believe in capitalism. He just doesn't believe in private property. And he thinks the state should have all this power. State regulators, these select chosen few priests, should be able to dictate AI policy for the rest of us. Under what conditions? The essay is unclear on this point, and it has to be, because to get clear would destroy what he's trying to do here, to make a conservative argument against artificial intelligence. I want to point something else out here. He talks about the use of brakes and recalibrations. It's like technological development is not a car. It doesn't have brakes. That's a metaphor, and it's a bad one because metaphors occlude reality. They shroud the truth about what's happening in comparisons to similar things. That's not thinking. Thinking is not about what is this thing like. It asks, what is this thing? What are you saying? The reality here, when he talks about brakes on technology, what he's saying is he wants to use the power of the state, the regulatory authority in some entity, some human beings armed with the power of the state to use violence and the law to restrain others. That's what's going on there. And fine, have that argument if you want, but I want to point out what's really going on. It isn't like you're driving a car and you just hit the brakes. You want to use state power. You want to use violence. That's what it will take. Just be honest with your arguments. Don't write this pablum where you avoid the crucial question in order to make these mealy-mouthed sounding pitches. Beneath all of that is a hard, mailed fist that will have to get used here. Choose. Choose clearly, but you need to know what it is you're arguing for. This is another quote. The obvious conservative response to a technology whose downsides are unfathomable is suppression, not encouragement. Move fast and break things might be an ethos conservatism can accept when the object being broken is the B2B SaaS status quo, but it cannot do so when the objects in question are human intelligence, sociability, agency, and existence, unquote. There's a lot here that's wrong, but it's like, well, there's unfathomable downsides to the technology. Well, there's unfathomable upsides as well. And again, it's not about the technology. It's about the way human beings use that technology. And again, he's saying here that the objects in question are human intelligence, sociability, agency, and existence. We will, even with computers now having generative AI capacity, I still have a brain that I can use. The choice to use AI is a choice. My human intelligence has not gone away. It's true, I've offloaded some things to AI because it's useful to me. I've had it solve problems for me, and it's very good at this. But the idea that I somehow can't have human relations because I have this tool that I can talk to in order to extract research and information and solve problems is risibly absurd. Risibly absurd. Well, what if technology develops even further? Yeah, what if it does? We'll have to make a choice at each of these moments on how to use our tools in a way that is good for human flourishing. And that's an individual choice, right? I can see people who don't want to use technology. I would say to them, you go forth and be happy. Go forth. I'm not here to tell anyone that you should use AI. I don't think if you think that it's a bad thing, you shouldn't have to use it, right? You should not be compelled. That's not what I'm saying here. But I don't want to be told that I can't use these tools to save labor and build a better life for myself because someone else has this fantasy, neurotic fantasy about hysterical extermination of the human race. That is insane. That cannot be the grounds of public policy. We should reject this kind of thinking root and branch. This is all the anti-capitalism stuff. He says here, even the rate at which new AI models are being released in the consumer market reflects a problem from a conservative standpoint. Conservatives view sudden change as something to be lamented, for it unsettles those traditions and habits on which human beings depend to orient themselves morally, unquote. Well, the whole world has changed, right? There's a sudden change that happens when you have a new kid, right? Should the government restrict that? Should it put some test in place, guardrails, in order to determine if I should have children, how many to have? Should I be forced to outsource that because there's change? And by the way, change is inevitable. I'm changing all the time. I don't know if any of you listening know this, but when you're born, from that moment forward, you go through a process of growth, peak, decline, and then death. Those are all changes. The ultimate change awaits each and every one of us in the form of the termination of our being, in terms of death, right? So that's pretty sudden. It's pretty sudden. It doesn't matter even if you know it's coming. It's still there at the end of the line. And that's pretty dramatic. Is the government going to ban death? Is it going to prevent me from dying? Is there going to be guardrails and institutions to save me from my own mortality? Give me a break. I think people need to, I read this kind of stuff and it's like, you got to grow up. People need to grow up. Anyway. Oh, then he's got this stuff about home. This is a really long. I have tons of notes here. This is dumb. So I'm going to read that. Quote, the foundations of modern political philosophy lie in the idea of escaping a state of nature, one of the primary ills of which is that the absence of civil authority makes it impossible to engage in any long-term projects because the future is so unclear. In this light, allowing rapid, unpredictable technological and economic revolutions to befall the citizenry should be seen as a sign of state failure, no less than losing the monopoly on physical force or ceding control of territory, unquote. That is stupid, right? The problem with the state of nature is not that the future is unknowable. The future is always unknowable. The problem with the state of nature is the violent death from warfare and civil strife. That's the hard part. It's the part where you get murdered. Right? And the fact that in that state, you don't have the ability to plan because you're constantly in danger of being robbed. Even Hobbes, when he talks about the dangers of the state of nature, he points out that the civilization isn't possible there. Life is nasty, poor, brutish, and short because of the war and violence that characterizes that state. Right? The state of war is the problem that emanates. The state of nature is a state of war. Technological development is not war. War is physical force against other human beings in order to harm and kill them. Technological development, building new tools, is production for the sake of solving problems in order to benefit the human person by satiating their needs and wants. Two totally different things are going on here. Again, Conti doesn't know what the state of nature is. So then he engages in this amorphous thinking where he blends things together that have no business being put together. Draw a dividing line. Get clear on the problem and the questions. And again, he says here, allowing rapid, unpredictable technological change. According to whom? How rapid is too rapid? What kind of change should be allowed? Who gets to decide? These are the core questions. All this whining about technology, and there's never any claim about what needs to be done or what costs will need to be imposed in order to achieve this utopia. I mean, the great thing about rapid technological change is an increase in production causes prices to fall and real incomes to rise. Isn't that a good thing? Why would you slow that process down? Why would you want to impose increased poverty on human beings who would like to have life get better? Imagine pitching that to voters. I'm going to keep your life from getting better and prevent your income from rising by suppressing your ability to think about problems. That's insane. It's insane, and we should call it out. This is another quote here. Quote, American conservatism has always framed itself as the party of liberty and personal responsibility, but rapid technological change makes a mockery of the idea that we are living autonomous, self-directed lives. To make a reasonable choice, one has to have some sense of what the future holds. Fumbling about the dark is not freedom, even if the government is not directly responsible for turning the lights off. Picking between door 1 and door 2 and one has no sense of what might lie behind them is not liberty, unquote. Liberty is about the freedom to choose. It's about being able to choose different paths. The future is always unknowable. That doesn't change, even with technology. We don't know what will come about from future human choices. But the idea that there are government experts and regulators who do know is insane. I don't even know if I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I could be hit by a bus on my way home today. So yes, I'm opening doors all the time and I don't know what lies behind them. That's called just being alive. That's just what it takes. That's just what it means to be human. We don't have knowledge of the future, and neither does the state. And the apparatus of the state has no crystal ball to see the future. That's just crazy. I mean, so you're going to take away the possibility that I can walk through a door that includes AI because you're afraid of the fact that you are living a human life, and you're going to call that freedom. Crazy. This doesn't make sense. Here's another quote. Any real democracy contains an intrinsically conservative element because democracy means the people doesn't get just run over by the future, unquote. That's another bad metaphor. The future is not a car. It doesn't run people over. The future are events that happen after the present, right? In tomorrow and beyond. That's what the future is. It's not a car. It doesn't run people over. The future is unknown. We have to deal with that reality. And who should be given the right to plan that out? Do human beings own their property? Should they have the ability to choose whether or not to use that property, to purchase AI technology for their own use, or should that be regulated by the state? That's the core question. That's the thing that Conti never answers. Oh, and then he talks about immigration policy and compares them to technology. I'll address this briefly. That's stupid. Our social contract, there's a world of difference between citizens being able to use their property as they see fit and a question of should we allow foreigners who are hostile to our way of life to enter into our social compact. Two totally different things, right? AI doesn't vote. AI doesn't pay taxes. AI doesn't have an opinion on DEI. AI doesn't commit welfare fraud. AI is totally different than human beings. We treat it differently under the law, rightfully so. You cannot compare these things. Well, immigration transforms things, but technology transforms things. That's not the point. Immigration, as we've had it before, violates the social compact and the consent of the governed because the government floods the country with people whom I would not want to share a political regime with for very clear, articulable reasons. They don't share my way of life. They don't care about protecting me. And in fact, many of them commit crimes and violate this way of life by committing fraud. That's why I don't like mass migration. I don't like mass migration because it's associated with communism and with leftism. Zohran Mamdani should never have been made an American citizen. He had no business being here, and we'd be a better country if he'd never immigrated here. That's why I don't like immigration. It's not, and comparing that to a computer got better at solving problems is just, again, what is going on here in this guy's mind? Like, what is happening in this article? Can't get clear. And these arguments don't even make sense. You're comparing unlike things in a way that just doesn't work. That's a problem. Okay, and then he starts talking about capitalism. Quote, anyone who believes in the value of capitalism as American conservatives do should look on AI skeptically. The tech right's leading figures floridly hate commies and hate opponents of AI is just the latest installment of a perennial anti-capitalist resentment of success. Yet the closer we get to the AI corporation's explicit goal of superintelligence, the greater the likelihood that capitalism as we know it vanishes. One can see this in the promise from Musk himself that once AI eminently transcends human capacities, most people will need to be sustained by a universal basic income. Or take the various suggestions that when it becomes economically inefficient to continue with human labor, the government should enforce a jobs guarantee to make sure we can all continue to earn a paycheck, unquote. Yeah, the problem here is Elon Musk doesn't understand economics very well, and neither do most of the AI tech leaders. You should not take the things they say at face value. They don't understand the marginal value of human labor. They don't understand the human allocation of resources question, and the arguments for UBI are fundamentally communist. Capitalism at core is rooted in the idea of private property, that you own your mind and your body and the things that you earn through the use of your labor, through exchange or production. That's it. It is not about businesses or jobs. It is about property. A job is an ongoing set of exchanges. That's what it is. You provide labor, you get money in return. How human beings acquire that labor mostly doesn't matter. Mostly doesn't matter. You could be a carpenter, you could be a massage therapist, you could be a teacher, you could be a firefighter, you could be a farmer. It doesn't really matter. There's a multitude of different ways of life available to the individual. Capitalism is about the ability to own tools, own the means of production, and produce something that other people want in exchange for it. The idea that if you build something, you should keep it. It's that simple. That's the origin of property and the whole free market system. So all this talk about capitalism that's detached from that point is automatically wrong. You're not getting what's going on here. Oh, man. He starts talking about fully automated luxury communism because he says that fully automated luxury capitalism is a contradiction in terms. And then he says that the tech right seems to think that economic growth and economic freedom march in tandem, but this is just a pious incantation. That's insane. The idea that economic development always favors freer markets is historically untrue. Just stupid. Marx was wrong in the mid-19th century to expect that capitalism would immediately fall to the proletarian revolution, but he was not wrong in expecting that the great increase in the scale of industry would mean that laissez-faire of early industrialism would not be sustained. In every country that has modernized, economic growth has involved an increase in state intervention. As society gets richer, the relationship between different interests become more complicated, and the potential for catastrophically harmful economic activity grows, and the state has to grow, and indeed historically has grown to meet these challenges, unquote. Yeah, these people always end up positively quoting Marx. Isn't that funny? I don't know if you can find a single one of these Luddite doomers who isn't in some way a Marxist sympathizer. And I mean that in a literal sense. They'll quote Marx approvingly. I'm amazed at how often I find people doing that. Marx was an idiot. He was an idiot whose view of dialectical materialism was disproven empirically by historical experience and was also just axiomatically wrong from the beginning because Marx himself didn't understand how exchange creates an increase in the standard of living. He doesn't understand where value comes from. He thinks it's objectively grounded in labor. It's subjectively valued by human beings for the solving of their problems as they order their needs and then allocate resources accordingly. Marx does not get that. Just straight up failure. Intellectually broken. And it's like, oh, economic growth and economic freedom march in tandem. Absolutely, right? If you own property, then you're incentivized to gather up more property in order to solve your own problems. That's why economic growth occurs. That's why exchange occurs. If I own the goods that I've produced and I can exchange with someone else in order to get what I want, I'm wealthier at the end of that transaction. And I can keep working as long as I want to in order to solve my problems. So what we call economic growth is just accumulating solutions to the natural poverty that we're born with, using our minds and then living in peace and productivity with others. That's what's going on there. So the reason you see economic growth is because you can work to make yourself happier in a market system. In a socialist system, you get told what to do. You're a slave. You are the property or the partial property of whoever's in charge. That's why it doesn't work, because you're not satisfying your own goods. You don't get to choose which of your own ends to satisfy. That is selected for you and enforced at gunpoint. That's what socialism is. And again, these people always, it's like, well, it's like, well, historically regulations emerged from industrialization. It's like, that was a choice made by human beings. It didn't have to be that way. It's not a necessary chain of causation. It isn't like, oh, I drop a ball from a height and it falls to the earth. Regulations are a product of human will, and human will could have been otherwise. There's real choices that were made there that were not simply inevitable. And any claim of historical inevitability is always a sign that someone wants to impose some kind of authoritarian or tyrannical structure. Always. We had no choice. You did have a choice, but you want to ignore that fact so you can get away with doing something you know was wrong, right? The core principle of protection of property and rights, the nature of harm, pollution, all of those things, the idea of negligence, if you want to go that direction, thinking about how to live together, all of the core principles apply to people who have a few simple goods and some little bit of land, to those who are billionaires with vast resources. The same principle applies. The scale of the property is not important. What matters is the core principle. How should we think about what it means to have ownership? How do we live together in peace and productivity? How do we have a functioning society? Those core principles, human nature doesn't change. The reality of who we are as human beings does not change. The context may change, but the same principles can guide us in all of these different stages. But we have to think clearly about the problem. Conti is not doing that. And it shows in his lazy and wrong appeals to Marx and historical nonsense. Historicist nonsense, excuse me. He quotes Dario Amodei's essay, Machines of Loving Grace. Amodei, of course, loves UBI. Again, Amodei's an idiot. I don't know why anybody takes what that guy says, to be true. I mean, you should think critically about everything coming out of his mouth. Like, oh, we need UBI because the genius data centers are going to produce all the goods, so then we need communism. That's not how that's going to work. Again, there will still be problems even after we get artificial general intelligence and it's available for everyone, et cetera, et cetera. There's still going to be problems that need to be solved. One of the things that Conti talks about later here is that if we have all this production and goods become so cheap and abundant that they no longer really have a price, then we won't have property rights and capitalism will go away. Therefore, in order to keep capitalism, we need to prevent a superabundance of goods. Superabundance occurs when so that's Conti's argument. Let me clarify here. Superabundance occurs when something is so common that it no longer is a source of economic allocation, of a trade-off between different kinds of goods. It's simply accepted as a condition of human life. A great example of superabundance is air. It does not need to be economically allocated in almost all circumstances, right? Oxygen is plentiful. It's so plentiful that you can use up as much of it as you want and there will still be more of it. That's how plentiful it is. So you can't put a price on it. It's not an economic good that's traded. You don't need property rights for oxygen. You can just breathe it in the air around you. So superabundance is a good thing, right? It's good that we don't need property in oxygen. It's very necessary for our lives. And so, it's wonderful that there's a lot of it. And there's lots of goods that are approaching superabundance in modern life. Water is very close to that point. There's free public drinking fountains everywhere. It still costs money to allocate those resources, but it's pennies. I mean, it's not very difficult to do that and provide it. That's a wonderful thing. And again, the point of capitalism is the ownership of property, and the purpose of the ownership of property is to achieve happiness. It's satisfaction. It's that you can enjoy your life, that good things, a deep satisfaction that comes about from that state of like a pleasure that lasts and it doesn't have these downsides on the back end. That's the purpose of economizing activity, resource allocation. If you could live in that sort of Edenic condition, of course you would want that. That's the whole point of doing all this work. Why is Conti defending poverty? Why is it that we see suffering as virtue, death as somehow a good thing? No, these are problems. These are tragedies we have to grapple with using our minds and our labor and our limited time here on earth. Let me just come out clearly, and I'm here probably at the end of the show, and I've gone on long here, but I'll close here. There's more in this, but I think you get the point. What I want to close with is, I am a defender of happiness. I am a defender of the golden age. I am a defender of solving problems. I am a defender of enjoying the life that you have in the highest and best degree. And it's not just, hedonism, pleasure, you just want to be a drug addict and do whatever. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that we should want to live in a world with good things, and there's nothing wrong with desiring what's good. And it's true, we just demonstrate excellence in overcoming challenges. But the truth is, once a challenge is overcome, there are more left for us. There is a whole vast, unexplored frontier of human thought, of spiritual development, of the enjoyment of life to the richest and highest degree. The perfect moderation, not eating too much, but eating of the best kind. And it's not just about the sensation, it's about this enduring satisfaction that is the life at its peak, virtue really and truly demonstrated. And excellence, right? It's becoming fully human. And I think happiness is good. The point of the struggle is the overcoming. That's the whole point. You struggle so you can overcome. The purpose of war is victory. It's not the war. It's not the violence. It's not the fear and the danger. It's accomplishing the goal you set out to achieve, right? And those virtues then are a means to an end, to the final and highest achievement, which is that state of happiness and success, true satisfaction. And we often, because our minds are not perfect, we often fail to achieve our goals. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying, and it certainly doesn't mean we should worship suffering. I think there's something nihilistic there. So, I think I'll end my critique of Conti's argument on those points. I think ultimately his argument amounts to nihilism. It amounts to a justification for totalitarian government control. And he claims, in the name of freedom, to use, he calls, and there's a passage later on, he talks about the voluntary adoption of the technology isn't really voluntary. It's coerced, because if you don't use the technology, then you can't have the benefits from that tech. So it's not really voluntary. but then the state should suppress it so that we can have these choices back. That doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. These people, these critics, these Luddites, these communists, whatever these people are always, they call coercion freedom and free choice coercion. That if someone freely chooses to use a technology that harms other people, that's coercive. But when the state uses violence to suppress that choice, that's really freedom. And it's that kind of unthinking, unreasoning argumentation that I think is really at the source of so much of our disintegrating public and political life today. So on that note, I think I'm going to end this show here. You've been listening to Lippincott Talk. My name is Josiah Lippincott. I hope to hear from you next time.